Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about, yes?
All
Okay,
right, start again.
okay, sure, here we go. Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Lydia Denworth. Lydia is a science journalist who investigates everything from Alzheimer's to zebrafishes. Oh, wow, my Spanish accent came is fish. Zebrafish. Okay, she's
Yes.
the author of 3 books: Toxic Truth, I Can Hear You Whisper, and today we will speak about her latest book, Friendship: The Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life Fundamental Bond. Lydia, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here with you.
So, Lydia, your book about friendship is very timely in a way that most friendships have been disrupted. I mean, if we had a social circle of people we will hang out on weekends or something of that nature, that has been totally destroyed. Well, some people who don't listen to science, they don't care about it. But anyway, for most of us, that has been destroyed. And we are having a hard time adjusting to this new paradigm. So in a way, or in many ways, your book helps us understand the many facets of friendships and how we can nurture them and make them survive and how important they are to us. So, that's to share how excited I am to have that conversation with you. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background. You have been a science journalist. How do you get into this field of expertise?
Well, I actually started as a more general journalist, not a science journalist. In fact, the fact that this is what I do now would have been very surprising to me back years ago. If you'd asked me, I was someone who was not that interested in science in school. I took the bare minimum requirements. And then I came to it kind of mid-career. My first book is Toxic Truth. It's about lead poisoning and environmental science, but I really came to that from an interest in children's health, and then I ended up writing about some very technical science in that book, and I found that I was better at it than I expected to be, I guess you could say. I think there are two kinds of science journalists out there. A lot of people have a science background and then they turn to writing about it. But some of us were English majors or history majors. I was a history major. And so we were writers first and then interested in science second. And I try to make what I don't know a virtue. And I ask a lot of questions and I double check my information, and I like to think that it puts me in the same shoes as a lot of readers who are not as familiar with all of the science, and you need to make sure that they understand what you're saying. And so I'm trying to write for my former self who had less familiarity, and now I have found that obviously it's what I do full time now, so I ended up really enjoying it. I think science is a great story, right? It's how it explains how we know things and what we don't know, and how people think about changing and changing what we know and expanding the boundaries of knowledge.
And when you were an English major, did you always wanted to be a journalist or a writer? What was when you signed up for English major, what was
I
your
was a
vision?
history major. I was sort of saying, I was lumping together English majors and history majors, but certainly I was also very into a lot of reading in English. Yes, I was a history major.
And what was it about history that at that time interested you?
Um, I think that I love reading about the past, and I certainly believe in the saying that if we don't understand our past, we can't change it. Um, and in fact, all of my books have quite a bit of history in them. There's some history of science in there. So I suppose that's the one way in which I have sort of stayed true to my background. And I always did want to be a journalist. Even in high school, I always wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a journalist. And so I think that I felt history was good preparation for that, because it grounded you in, you would understand kind of the issues and things that face us today by understanding what happened in the past.
Right. Okay. So at a given moment, you decided to write books. You wrote, your first one was Toxic Truth. Then you wrote I Can Hear You Whisper. Can you tell us what was that one about?
Yes. So my youngest son, Alex, is deaf and has a cochlear implant. And that book, I Can Hear You Whisper, um, is the story of my discovering his deafness and trying to understand what to do about it. It's a combination of, it's part memoir, part science book about the brain and sound and language in the brain, and also some cultural history about deaf culture and the disagreement over technology for deaf people, and my story of being a hearing parent, finding myself in the uncomfortable position of being criticized by people in the deaf community. So there was a very strong movement against cochlear implants for a while within the deaf community. It's still there a little bit. It's much less intense than it used to be, but the same ideas are there. So that was an uncomfortable place for me to be, and I needed to understand as a hearing person why cochlear implants, which seemed so miraculous to me.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, you don't know what that is?
No.
A cochlear implant is a piece of technology that really helps deaf people hear in a much more it's artificial hearing, and there's an implanted piece inside the head and then an external piece, and they're connected by a magnet. But it's a hearing aid just uses your existing hearing, your residual hearing, whatever's left, and amplifies sound to help you hear. But if you are completely deaf, a hearing aid doesn't do anything for you. A cochlear implant can give you hearing even if you are profoundly deaf, and it sends a signal to the brain through the auditory nerve that mimics actual hearing. It's not equal to natural hearing at all. It's, in fact, someone told me once that it is pretty much like listening to Daffy Duck read a ransom note. Like, it's very imprecise in terms of the quality of the sound. But my son was only 2 when he got it. And if you are very young and your brain is still in development, you can take that sound that you're getting and make sense of it, and learn to talk and everything that goes with that. And so my son is able to operate in the hearing world quite fluently. I mean, he doesn't hear like a hearing person, but he hears with his technology. He wears a hearing aid in one ear and a cochlear implant in the other. He does remarkably well.
Well, okay. So our interview today is about friendship, but I'm curious, why would be a pushback in the non-hearing community against this awesome piece of technology?
Well, it's a little bit complicated, but ultimately it comes down to pride in the deaf community and the signing community, and a feeling that they don't need to be fixed, that deafness is a difference, not a disability. So in that, it's similar to the neurodiversity movement and autism and other places where people say, the world should come to us. We don't need to change to accommodate you. That's really the biggest reason. But the second reason is also that I think they thought it wouldn't work. And there's a long, long history of people trying to change deafness unsuccessfully and doing a lot of crazy things that didn't work. And I think deaf people had kind of had it with that, which is fair. But the fact is that cochlear implants do work for most people.
Okay, I'm a cyclist, and I can tell you, when I cycle, I depend as much on my ears as I depend on my vision. Like I can tell with my ears how far back if a vehicle is coming, or like if I should get out of the way without looking back or without a rear view mirror. So I mean, and I don't need a precise sound. I just need to know that there is something
Mm.
behind me, and that helps me navigate or circulate throughout the city without having to be looking to each side of the road. So anyway, so that's why I was surprised there was any kind of pushback.
Most hearing people are very surprised, and that's why I think it's an interesting question. It's worth looking into. It's worth reading the book if you're interested.
Yes, there we go. Okay, and then what is it that interests you in the subject of friendship?
Well, I mean, who's not interested in friendship, right? But really, the reason I decided to write a book about it is because by then I was a full-time science journalist and I was primarily covering the brain. So the book on deafness got me interested in the brain, and I go to a lot of conferences and I listen, or I did pre-COVID. My job is really to listen to scientists talk about what interests them and what they think is important. And I also listen to them when they talk amongst themselves. And I really noticed started at a social neuroscience conference that there was all this talk about friendship, and in a different way than I think we normally think about it. So a lot of us, I mean, well, one of the things is that friendship is so familiar and it's such a part of everyday life that a lot of us think we know everything there is to know about it. But the truth is that for most of human history, we've thought of friendship as cultural. And it is. There are plenty of cultural layers to friendship, but there are also these important biological and evolutionary parts of the story of friendship. And that's what my book is about. So it's explaining that friendship is far deeper than we might have imagined, and that it is not a luxury, but a necessity. It's part of our human infrastructure. And I thought that was really interesting, and that if I didn't know that so clearly, that other people wouldn't either. And so it was worth spending time on. Plus, I figured, hey, maybe I'll learn more about how to be a good friend.
Oh, good. I read a book. I think I'm not sure it's called Blue Zones, or it's about longevity and areas of the globe where people live the longest. So this author focused on different areas where people were living over 100 years
Yes, blue
or
zones,
more.
right,
Yeah, blue
right.
zones. And one of the things that the person found was that these people who lived to that age, they had strong networks and a strong friendship, and they, well, that was one of the reasons, I don't know, they could sustain whatever life was throwing at them.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I mentioned that in the book. But the thing about it is that we began to understand that people lived longer if they were more socially connected, more integrated. But at first, we thought that that had to do with a concept called social support. And that's really just any help or support that you get from your friends, but you can think of it most explicitly as, the fact that if somebody is nearby or you have close friends or loved ones in the house, someone's more likely to be able to drive you to the hospital if you get sick or notice that you need to go. And so, I mean, in a very fundamental way, that would explain why people live longer, right? If you have a heart attack and nobody knows, then that's worse. But the thing is that it turns out that in other species, the animals like baboons with really strong positive bonds also live longer and are healthier and have more reproductive success. And baboons don't drive each other to the hospital, right?
and,
So there's something else going on.
and at what age do we start developing friendships? 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? I mean, I see kids in the kindergarten already being best friends.
Yes, a lot of very young kids declare themselves best friends. Actually, one of my favorite definitions of friendship is that a study in which developmental psychologists asked 3-year-olds to define a good friend, or ask them, what's a good friend? And they said 3 things. They said, a good friend shares with you, plays with you, and doesn't hit you, which is actually pretty much true, right? Out of the mouths of babes. Those things, those are very concrete versions of what friendship is. And that's how kids that age think. And they get more abstract and relational as we get older. But fundamentally, that's kind of what it's about. It's about that it's fun to be with them. They make you feel good, and they share with you, they help you, all of those things. But to really answer your question technically in a more scientific way, kids make friends, but they need the skill of theory of mind, or empathy. I mean, you can call these things, you can call it some different things people might be familiar with, but it's fundamentally that ability to understand that somebody else has a different set of ideas and views about the world than you have. There's sort of levels of sophistication with that. And kids, some of that they have early on. I mean, they're able, and when they're 1.5 or 2, they're able to sort of pat you on the knee if they see you're crying and ask if you're, say, oh, okay, and things like that. But to really get there is sort of around 3 or 4. And then the thing that kids do is, so they first learn how to be social from their parents and their families. But when they get to school, they triple the time that they spend with same age peers. And then they start to learn more sophisticated parts of friendship, how to collaborate and cooperate, how to get along in a group, and also how to give support and not just receive it. Because most kids with their parents, for instance, are not, offering real substantive support. And so friendship is always evolving as kids are growing, and in adolescence, it becomes something else again. But it starts very, very early, that social impulse. Kids are learning to be social pretty much from the hour that they're born. In fact, you can tell the difference in the brain waves of a baby who was born yesterday versus today, because their social parts of their brain are getting just a little bit more mature every day, every hour.
Okay, I feel that this past year put our notion of friendship to the test in 2 ways. First of all, it was the coronavirus, who we had to use other means of communication in order to keep those friendships strong. And then there were the elections in the United States, which tested the friendship of many people. And I have some friends who were quote unquote Trumpists, and I was like horrified. Oh my God, we are friends and you are a Trumpist. I was so surprised. And then I had to find ways to digest that my friends had different opinions or point of view. And, it made me question my friendship first, but then I said, well, politicians come and go, but hopefully this friend will be my friend for many more decades and to many more presidents. I wonder if you have any comments on friendships and different political views or social values. Let's say, I don't know, gun rights versus non-gun rights, or gay versus straight, or whatever.
Well, yes, this comes up a lot, people, for sure. And it wasn't just this last year, 2016, when Trump was first elected, was really the beginning of the Great Divide. I mean, well, the irony is we thought we were divided before, but oh my gosh, no, we weren't. Not like this, right? I think part of why it is so intense, or it felt so intense, is that a big part of friendship is shared interests, but also shared worldview. So we do tend to be drawn to people who see the world the way we do. It's, of course, important not to only surround yourself with people who see the world exactly the way you do, but this divide was so extreme, and it seemed to speak to who people really were and what they valued in a way that was more fundamental than we used to think of political views. It's one thing, I mean, your views even about, like, I don't know, taxes and the role of the government and things like that could in theory still be sort of separated from who someone is as a person. But because of the way Trump behaved, it made some people feel that there was this gulf that opened up between them and anyone else. Now, what's the solution to that? And is that irreparable? It depends. I think that, you said kind of in passing that, well, politics are temporary and friendships should be forever. Yes, but it may also be the case that some of those friendships where the greatest divide was are not really ever going to be what they used to be. And I'm going to argue that that's okay, because in general with friendship, there's a little bit more churn in the course of our lives than we often think there is. And the core friendships that we have, our closest friendships anyway, it's important that those are very, very strong quality bonds. That's where we get health benefits from friendship. And there we need to feel sustained by those friendships. And if we're constantly navigating the political divide, that gets harder, right? And so maybe those friends who have different worldview move a few rungs out in your circle, and you them. I mean, it's mutual, right? That's right. The thing that is so striking about this is the depth of feeling on both sides of the issue, and the sense that the other people are just so misguided and not good people, right? But those are very, very strong emotions, and it's hard for a friendship to get past that. But if you want it to, you have to work at it. And then you have to really work to try to understand where the other person is coming from, why they see the world that way. So I mentioned theory of mind with the little kids. Well, I think adults have been engaging in a very adult version of that, where to the extent that anyone is really trying to understand why somebody else has the view that they have.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Wow. You added another perspective on the way that I see friendship, and I'm going to ask myself some more questions as we finish our interview. Another question that I have is the difference in friendship between women, the difference woman and woman, the difference in friendship between men and men, and the difference in friendship between men and women. I noticed my relationship with my male friends is different than the relationship of my ex-girlfriend with her friends, girlfriends as well, and it just, I felt like, I could never have a friendship like you have with your friends, but it feels unnatural to me. But I wonder what's your take.
It's complicated. So the stereotypes are what you've just said, that, let me put it this way. There are stereotypes about the difference between female friendship and male friendship, and there is some truth to the stereotypes. And the simplest way to sum them up is that women do friendship face to face. They talk, and men do friendship side by side. So that maybe they watch sports together, or they play sports together, or they sit on bar stools next to each other, right? But there's less of that, what psychologists call self-disclosure, the deep conversation about your innermost thoughts, right? And there's truth to that, although of course there's plenty of individual variability in as there is in most things. And there are probably some evolutionary reasons in there. We've discovered that we always thought of the natural response to crises in evolutionary terms as fight or flight, right? And certainly the men, like they were the ones supposed to be out there fighting or running away. The women, though, it turns out, responded differently, or the females, and that theory has been summed up as tend and befriend. And so women or females often had babies around. They couldn't run in the same way, or they couldn't fight. So what that meant was that the way they survived was to make friends and to work to build coalitions of people to support them, and to then be able to care for the little ones or the older ones or whatever it is. And so there's some truth to probably the way we've all evolved, But most of the differences that we talk about all the time, I think are primarily cultural now. Because, you know, men have often been raised in various, well, it does depend where you live and what culture you live in, because there are differences in some societies. The men are the ones who are, in fact, actually, like hundreds of years ago, the men thought they were the ones who had friendship sussed, that women weren't capable of deep friendship, right? And so the pendulum has swung way the other way. And really where it belongs is somewhere in the middle. And the thing I think is really interesting and that I talk about in the book is that actually the latest research shows that the similarities in how men and women think about friendship outweigh the differences. So both men and women value friendship quite a lot. Their expectations of what they're going to get out of it are different. But if what you get is matching your expectations, then you're okay. And so doing it differently doesn't necessarily mean the friendship is any less worthwhile or any less valued.
And I see group of male friends, I see group of female friends, but I see less often of groups of male and female all mixed together, unless it's, I don't know, a work activity or a family activity. But I see that as less often. I wonder if that's the same impression that you get.
Well, there is definitely truth to that. So, and little kids, there's an age, I think it's 7 or 8, where I'm forgetting now exactly, but somewhere in those early elementary school years where they really start to gravitate to kids of the same sex. Not everybody, but a lot of them, right? And there's got to be some, I mean, again, it's a little bit cultural, but part of it is probably biological. But there's no real reason why men and women can't be friends. I mean, and of course, men, the big reason that everybody uses or says is that the sexual tension is too much. And men in particular seem to have a hard time with that they don't feel that men and women can be friends because the sex stuff gets in the way. Women have less of a hard time with that sometimes, but you know, it's certainly true that like a lot of women are very, very close to gay men. And that's where you've taken sex out of the picture. And so then they can be friends. And so it's, and, you know, women who are married or men who are married for a long time. I mean, my husband and I have a very close couple that we're friends with, and we certainly consider ourselves friends across all of it, right? I'm friends with her, but I'm also friends with the other guy. Maybe not as intensely as with the woman, that is true. But, you know, I certainly think of him as one of my closest friends. And so, you know, that is possible. It is, how much is the cultural stuff getting in the way? I mean, I really do think that kids or that boys get raised in a way that they're sort of told that getting too close to another guy is not appropriate, or that, you know, and yet I have 3 sons and no daughters, and they all have intensely good friends that they're very close to and care about a lot. Do they interact in the exact same way as I did with my friends then? Probably not, but certainly those friends matter a lot to them.
Well, Lydia, this is a fascinating topic. There's so much more in your book. We're not going to get through all of it. We're going to let something for the listeners to go out and check out your book. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where they can follow you.
The book is Friendship, the Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond. And the best place to find me is my website, which is lydiadenworth.com. And I'm on social media and everywhere else, but you can find all of that via the website. I'm at Lydia Denworth on most social media. And the book is wherever books are sold and out in paperback now.
Right. And all those links will be in the show notes of the podcast. Lydia, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ellen. It's been great.